All right, so last time we created a bunch of particle effects. In this one, we're going to start looking at shaders. Now, if we take a look at this little robot guy here, oops, where's our armature? This one doesn't have a texture. Let's see, here we go, geometry. There we go. Okay, so if we took at this guy here, a model, and you've kind of learned this by a little bit of this by building your house, consists of a mesh, and that's the geometry. And then within that mesh, you'll notice, let's dive a little deeper into the actual armature mesh. It has these things called materials. Now, a material is simply this orb, and then you can apply textures and stuff. But what's behind this material is something called shader code. And Unity uses a combination of HLS cell, and then they have their own like shader framing, sort of a shader framing tool that Unity encapsulates everything in. We're not going to get into shader programming too much, but what we're going to do is we're going to use a program called Shader Graph. And in Shader Graph, you can actually create these custom parameters here and do some really cool effects. So it pushes it beyond just creating a simple material. So what I generally do is in this art folder here for a project, I'll create a folder called shaders. So go ahead and right click, create a folder. And then within this, we'll create like I create folders for different types of shaders. So let's just create another folder inside that shaders folder. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this folder like play. And within this, we're just going to create like a junk shader that we can delete. Or you can rename later and put in its own folder. So the way we create a shader is we go to create, and then we go over to shader graph. And for now, we're just going to go to URP lit shader. Now, you see there's all these other options. The two that you're mostly concerned with are lit and unlit. Once we create this, what we can do is, let me go ahead and make a sphere in our scene here, and we're going to apply this shader to it. But the way that shaders are applied is you have to, once the shader is made, you right click on it and you go to create material. And this material will now be linked to shader graph, new shader graph. So you can see that in the title here. So I'm going to drag this and just drop it on top of this sphere. Now, it doesn't look like anything happened, but we know it's placed here. And the reason for that is by default, when you create a new shader, it's pretty similar to the material that's made on there. Now, how do we access this or edit a shader? Well, let's go ahead and double click this new shader graph file. I'm actually going to undock this for a second. Now, up here, there's different elements. There's the graph inspector, which we're going to use. And remember I mentioned there's lit and unlit shaders? Well, you can actually switch between the different shader types here. Something else is there's also a main preview that you can turn on and off, and it looks like it's hidden behind our blackboard here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my blackboard back on after. And this main preview is as we're hooking up these nodes, for instance, like I can create a property here, and let's say this property is like a color, and I could drag this out, and I can connect it to here. This is a node right here, and this base color, if sometimes you have to move this around, is black here. So I can go ahead and make it red, and then I click off, and you could see that it updated here. But it doesn't automatically update in our scene. You have to hit Control S, or you have to hit Save Asset up in this corner. And you can see we just created our first shader, which is just a shader that turns our sphere red. You can also apply that material to other models. So for instance, with this robot guy, if we go to his armature mesh here, you can see he's got different parts that make up this character. We can actually grab this shader and just drop it on there. And now we have a robot with red arms. I actually kind of like the way that looks, and I think it'll make it stand out in our game, so I'm just going to leave that in there. I know for sure that we're not going to keep this as a, this shader the way it is, because I really want to go into a lot of these different ways of creating nodes. Now, something else here is I can actually right-click on this, and I can go to Custom Mesh, and I can actually select things like the parts of the robot. Let me expand this out a little bit. And what's nice about this is it lets me sort of see the shader in real time on the mesh itself. Since we are just using a sphere for now, I'll just go back to using a sphere. And I can also like rotate around this by holding the Alt and left mouse button. The problem with this I found, and maybe there's a solution I haven't noticed, is you can't really pan in here, and that's annoying because it's based on the pivot point of whatever the mesh is. So let's hide our graph inspector for a second, just because of space. Something else to point out is also that you have control within here for things like metallic. So if we move this left and right, you can see it makes our ball look a bit more shiny, more like metal. We can also do things like increase our smoothness, which makes it look more like a mirror. So let's pull this back a little bit and let's really increase our smoothness. And let's go a little bit darker. And if I save this, you can see now it gives this fake impression that it's reflecting the environment in our scene. Let's go into something else I want to notice is if we make a variable in our Blackboard here, or property, if we select our sphere, it actually appears under our surface options here. See under surface inputs? So I can actually update it here. It's kind of like when we make a public variable. So if I want to make this white again, or maybe a light blue, something like that, you can see I have access to that. And just as much as creating a texture or whatever, something else I want to do is go in here to lighting and then, let's see. I'm going to turn off my light probes because it's picking up the distance with this sphere. And I want to take off, let's see. Yeah, I wanted to get rid of this green selection, but that's okay. I forgot how to do that. But anyway, let's go ahead and continue on. And let's talk about some other things. Like there's some pretty cool effects. For instance, there's something called a Fresnel, which is if you look at, and maybe we'll create a toon shader next that will make like a little toy in our scene. But this Fresnel effect adds like a nice little glow to the edge of the edge of our sphere. So we could do things like, well, I want to make this glow. Well, there's different properties here. For example, emission. If I grab this and I drop it in here and I hit Control S to save, you can see we now have a glowing, really simple way of creating something that maybe in our game we want people to focus on, And there's different things like we can increase the strength or the power of that. It's based on world space. We can change that too. And that what that means is based on wherever we're looking at it from the world. So this might be a nice way to add an extra effect for a pickup for your game. You could also see that it also adds a nice little highlight to our robot here. There's also other cool things, right? Like there is, if we bring back our graph inspector here, we can actually make we can also make things like transparency happen inside our scene. So say we wanted to create a nice little like dissolve effect or fire effect. Well, we can change our surface type from opaque to transparent. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. You'll notice nothing happened. And the reason for that is we have this alpha here, and then we have alpha clipping. I'm going to turn alpha clipping on and explain that in a second. So let's go ahead and do something you'll see a lot is simple noise. And all this does is it adds a little bit of surface information. Like you could multiply it on top and it makes it look dirty. But say I want to use this noise, which you notice there's like white and black areas here. Anywhere that's essentially the darker area, if I drag and I put this into my alpha here and I hit Control S, what you'll notice is that parts of the model disappeared. So as I move this value and I hit Control S, you can see it also updates. Well, say you want to update this in real time, right? Like so say we make this really tiny and I hit Control S, you could see, and also notice that our shadows react to this. Well, we can actually create more properties. So let's go ahead into our property here and let's do a float. And I'm going to call this noise. And I can just drag this into the scene and I can put this right into the scale and then save it. And what you'll notice now is the default, the reason why it disappeared is our default for noise is 0. But if we select our sphere, let's kind of move this down a little bit, and Go back to our inspector here. And I increase the noise size. You can see now we can actually adjust. Oh, that's the scale. So we're getting more of a swipe effect. Like say you want something to disappear in your scene. Let's see. There we go. So we go a little bit higher now. We can see that we have like this kind of cool dissolve effect happening. And it also happens on the arms of our robot, right? So lots of cool things you can do with shaders. And you can also code this so these like animate over time and all this other stuff. So something else that's pretty cool that we can do is notice we have this Fresnel effect. I'm actually going to select this and just delete this for a second and then save it so we can go back to looking at this Fresnel effect. You can actually multiply colors together just like in Photoshop. You know, if you're familiar with Photoshop where you're screening or multiplying like images on top of each other. So inside of here, let's say we want to make this Fresnel, right? This highlight here, blue or, you know, yellow. Well, what I can do is I can hit spacebar here, or actually, yeah, and then I'll just do multiply. And we'll grab our multiply node. And what I can say is I could say, well, I'm going to multiply this, which is the Fresnel effect. And let's go ahead and put this in emission by a color. So let's grab, just grab this color here, which is set to red. And I'll link it inside of there. And now you could see if I hit Control S that our rim is actually blue because it's blue here. It's not this whatever's in our editor trumps it. So let's move this to like a purple. And let's actually detach this color here. It'll go back to default gray. We really should just make another color there. But now you can see we have this default shader. Maybe we take our metallic, we zero out our metallic, make it more flat, and we zero out our smoothness so we could see that. And let's save our asset. There we go. So now you can see we have this glowing pink thing. Again, bringing attention to, you know, like here's our robot. Nice. We now have like a nice little outline around it. But, you know, bringing, you know, attention to maybe a pickup in our game. So I'm going to end this video here. And the next one, we'll start to build out like real shaders and just build on our shader graph knowledge.